So our presentation is titled The eSpecifics of Illusory Vowel Perception in Spanish L1 Listeners. We started our PIRE experience in November 2019, and originally I've known Dr. Carlson since spring 2019, so I was already planning on doing PIRE with him prior to November, and we had talked about it. And then whenever PIRE had gotten all settled and there were more people, he asked if I would want to do it with another person who was interested in the illusory vowel, which is something that we will explain in a minute. And we ended up actually with two Penn State mentors, Dr. Carlson and Dr. Ann Olmsted, and Maria Teresa Bajo Molina and her lab in Spain.
We were originally going to go to Granada, Spain. That was our original plan, but we had to be shifted onto an online setting for pretty obvious reasons, I'm sure. But while we were online, we were still able to do everything online, including meeting with our host country in Spain. And while we were still able to keep in touch, we mourned the loss of what could have been a summer abroad in Granada. But it was really fun because we were able to help our partner university with their experiments and work with them with their ideas as well.
With our partner lab, we specifically got to do bi-weekly meetings. In these meetings, we read different scientific articles in the field of linguistics and sometimes more in the field of psychology, kind of in psycholinguistics. But our partner lab also helped us with our creation of stimuli for experiment number 2 in this presentation, which will make sense once you see how this is all set up. And through this, Angelica and I were both able to learn how to conduct ourselves in lab meetings with other people, other than Dr. Carlson and Dr. Olmsted. And we also were able to collaborate and take their ideas and help with our ideas and kind of boost everybody's collective effort towards the goal. So we did 2 experiments, but they were both centered around this concept of the illusory vowel. So the illusory vowel, the best way to explain it is, does everybody know how whenever you listen to a native Spanish speaker who speaks English as a second language and they say things like, I speak Spanish, or I go to a school, they add that little eh to the beginning of the S consonant onset clusters? Okay, so that is the epenthetic vowel, and the counterpart is the illusory vowel, because the fun thing about this is that they actually perceive that extra vowel like when other people are speaking. So when they listen to us as native English speakers, they actually hear that extra vowel, or well, their brain tricks them into thinking they hear it. So that was the main focus of our study. And we were able to come up with experiment 1, which is how much auditory information is required to induce the illusory vowel. And then experiment 2, which was, does accented speech affect the perception of the illusory vowel?
So we recruited our participants through Prolific. It's an online recruiting website that lets you to get that allows you to get participants through that way. And for experiment 1, we recruited 124 participants, 83 of whom had listed Spanish as their first language. And for experiment 2, we recruited 96 participants total. 48 had first language Spanish, and the other 48 had first language English. And this was all done online through Gorilla, and which is a way we could make our experiment through an online, I forgot the word for experiment, my bad, through an online setting. And they both included language surveys adopted from the language history questionnaire.
For experiment 1, we were really interested in knowing whether or not an S consonant cluster alone was enough to induce the illusory vowel in Spanish L1 listeners. So the hypothesis was that as more phonological information is added, the illusory vowel will be induced. We tested this with a 4IX discrimination paradigm with gated stimuli, which means they had 4 choices, or they heard 4 things and they had a binary choice. So they had 4 auditory things, and they heard 4 things. They had to make a choice between whether the first pair or the second pair sounded different. And the gated stimuli just means that for each non-word, we cut it into smaller chunks, which is on the next slide. And this allowed us to determine exactly how much phonological information is needed to induce the illusory vowel in Spanish L1 listeners. And this experiment really aimed to shed light on how the illusion is perceived to begin with. So this is what I meant by the gates. So let's say we had different non-words that we cut into smaller words, and this slide shows escofa, scolfa, and ascolfa, all broken into the gates for each trial. So gate 1 was just vowel S, 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 and then gate 2 was esk, esk, sk, esk. That would be an example of how the trial sounded to the participants. And as you can see, as you build up to gate 5, more and more phonological information is added, meaning vowels and consonants are added until you get to the gate 5 entire non-word. We had 3 conditions for each gate, which were A versus no vowel onsets, S versus A onsets, and A versus A onsets. We chose A because the A is not induced as an illusory vowel. So this allowed us to use it as a control, the A versus A, because Spanish speakers are able to hear the difference between asco and esco very easily. And they are able to hear sko and asco very easily. So this allowed us to really narrow our focus in on the A versus no vowel onsets for analysis. And here we have our experiments, or our experiment results. So in this graph, on the left, we have the English performance, and on the right, we have the Spanish performance at each gate broken down by accuracy for each condition. So the comparisons were the A no vowel, E no vowel. And as you can see, the accuracy never really goes below, it goes just below 60%. That's still pretty low. And above 80 to 90% means basically that they could hear the difference. This shows how many times the participants correctly identified which pair had the differing stimuli. So for the English speakers, they were pretty okay across the board. For the Spanish speakers, they were okay with the A no vowel and EA comparisons. But then you have the E no vowel, and you go from gate 2, where it's just S consonant burst, to gate 3, where it's S consonant burst plus vowel, and their performance just tanks. They cannot tell the difference. Well, barely. They're doing just above chance with their performance here, which means that the S consonant cluster alone isn't really enough to induce the illusory vowel, but as soon as they have that extra bit of phonological information at gate 3, they cannot. Their brain just tricks them. And to highlight the difference between gate 2 and gate 3 would be skull. That's the only difference. So just that extra little vowel is enough to push the illusion over the edge, which we thought was really cool.
So experiment 2 focused more on the full words in regards to the vowel. Like Emily's had those gates, mine was just the full words. We had 2 speakers for this experiment. We had an English speaker speaking the words, American accented. Our lovely Dr. Matt Carlson did it for us. And we had a Spanish speaker, specifically Spain accented, from our sister lab with Teresa Bajo. We had someone from her lab do the speaking for that. We also had 3 onsets for this experiment as well. We had an E onset, an A onset, and an O onset, and the canonical version. So that would be like S school, O school, and just school. And our hypothesis for this was that the second language English speakers would reject the words that are not words. So that would be the E onsets and the O onsets when spoken by the English speaker. And our second hypothesis was that the second language English speakers would accept the fake words with an E, like es school, when spoken by the Spanish speaker, but not O school when spoken by the Spanish speaker. So we used auditory stimuli with the 3 different onsets for words in English. So they would be like school, stop, spot, stuff, words with the S plus consonant. We also used fake words as well to kind of make sure that they understand that those words were fake. And we had the O in the front as a constant because O plus in school would be a fake word regardless. And the participants would indicate whether each word was a real word or not. So O school would be marked as a fake word, school would be a real word. So each participant also heard the same speaker throughout the trial. They never heard 2 speakers, they all had the same one. So this is an example of our American English speaker.
Scale. Scale.
He's saying escale. And then our Spanish speaker.
Scale. Scale.
So
Scale.
quite a difference between the 2 accents.
Scale. Scale.
So for our results, at the bottom, it tells us the canonical versus the E plus word versus the O plus word. There are 3 different categories at the bottom, and that's what it's saying. On the sides, it's saying that it's the percent that they indicated that it was a real word. And then at the top, we had 2 different categories. We had it as an English participant, an English listener, or a Spanish listener. And then the triangles indicated whether it was a Spanish accent, and the circles indicates whether it's an American English accent. So for the canonical version, the English speakers were very efficient at determining whether it was a word. But when we get to the E plus word and the O plus word, they were very more hesitant. But for the American English, they indicated that they were both fake words. But for the Spanish accented, they indicated that they were more real words. They're more in the middle there at 50%, which is rather interesting to look at, that they were perceiving O school and es school as real words when spoken by a Spanish accent. Looking at the Spanish listeners in the second little graph, for the canonical versions and the E plus the word, they said that they were both real words when spoken by either accent, which was fascinating. And for the O plus words, they were also kind of hesitant for both accents on whether it was a real word or not. But they did say that it was more real words than the English listeners. But they were pretty consistent for both accents on what they were indicating as the correct answer, which was really cool.
We actually got to add like a questionnaire at the end to see like what they thought about the speaker. And it turns out that a lot of people thought that Dr. Carlson was what did they say, Russian or Spanish? We got like crazy answers, but it
Yeah.
turns out that the people who had given Dr. Carlson and the other speaker both some leeway kind of accepted both of them as different like foreign speakers of English or English L2 speakers. So they kind of cut them a little bit more slack. But the Spanish listeners really don't, we don't know if they don't hear the difference or if they just accept both for the A plus word. But this does indicate that they don't hear the difference.
So our final thoughts on this lovely project that we've had a year and a half to work on. It was a very cool learning experience for all of us, especially transitioning into this online world. We had to do it pretty rapidly. So finding a way to get participants through an online setting, a way to transition the experiment onto an online one. It was all a learning experience and adapting, which is always good to have as well. We also created a new experiment. I don't know if you want to talk about it at all, Emily.
The new experiment is kind of a combination of Angelica and I's experiment. It follows the 4IX paradigm, but we use English words. So we're working on cutting the English words for the accented speakers into the 5 gates. Well, they might not be exactly 5. We haven't decided that yet. But it will be gates, and we are going to present it in a 4IX paradigm. And then we also are doing a follow-up study with the Granada team about attitudes towards accents and how that affects perception and acceptance of non-canonical words.
And we finally were able to learn how to participate in linguistic lab meetings in a formal setting, not just with us and our mentors, but with us and the Granada team, and learning how to focus our thoughts into this linguistic world.
Does anybody have questions?
This was wonderful. Thank you very much. Really interesting work. I'm so excited to hear that you have follow-up experiments, you know, things that you are interested in continuing on doing, and that some of these collaborations will be with the PIRE partners, will continue to be with the PIRE partners. So this is absolutely wonderful. Does anybody have any questions? And just please raise your hand or just unmute yourself. So I have a question. How do you think that this experience has affected your own perception of accents and sounds and what you yourself perceive? So do you, how do you feel that now you no longer, I mean, what do you do?
I mean, we've actually talked about this a lot. I notice it more. And it's actually really funny because I also speak French and I add the epenthetic vowel a lot when I speak French.
Wow.
Like I say estressé and like things like that. And then I realized after working on this, like that's happening. So my Spanish was affecting my French, which was really funny. And I think as far as social attitudes, I don't think that I really noticed it before this experiment. But even after, I mean, I'm pretty accepting of when other people say things.
Yeah, it was interesting. We were both in a class together last semester. We were both in a Spanish class. And so whenever we would have like a guest speaker, someone speaking in English in their Spanish accented tone, we were all like, oh, there it's happening. Stop, they said it. So it was cool when we could kind of point it out. But I mean, at first it's not really something you pick up on until it's kind of exposed to you. So now that it's exposed, I'm realizing it more and more.
It's interesting that you say that you hadn't noticed it before, because clearly native speakers of Spanish learn in English. notice it. We know, when we hear each other, we know, oh, that person is saying a school, whatever other words. And, people eventually learn to not put an epithetic vowel anymore. And, we end up saying things like school and whatever other words there might be. But, I always, I start my classes when I talk about these phenomena, exactly how you started your presentation by saying, you probably have noticed that when native speakers of Spanish speak English, they say things like a school and whatever. And then here you are saying, well, wasn't really focusing on that until you pointed it out, which I think is absolutely beautiful. One more example of how we linguists think that we know what people do when in fact we don't know always what people do. Tiffany, you have a question.
Just maybe a comment for a possible follow-up as well. I know, yeah, you studied Spanish speakers in Granada, but it would be cool to do the same within the United States, just to see how the Spanish speakers are actually behaving in that sense. Because at least we would think that some of the Spanish speakers wouldn't, like Professor Ducia just said, might already develop that school without the epenthetic vowel. But I think it could be interesting to see people who got here a long time ago that might still do the epenthetic vowel, right? And how that possibly has to do with some social linguistic factors as well. So it's very cool what you're doing. I love this. And I'm so happy that you got to experience this, although it was online. But yeah, it could be cool to just look within the United States to see how that's working here.
That's a good idea. We actually did, native Spanish speakers around the world, not just in Spain. So I don't think we had any from the United States necessarily, but we had a lot of native Spanish speakers from South America and Central America as well.
Yeah, because it was online, they could be from wherever.
Yeah.
Which was cool that we got quite a group.
Although Dr. Carlson does have interesting research about how English can affect the perception of the illusory vowel and how it's kind of malleable. And although it may not affect their actual responses, it does affect their reaction times after at different levels of fluency. So that's an interesting paper. I think it's called Malleable Illusory Vowel Effects. Specifically, what did you hear? If you're interested.
Something like that.
Yeah, I think I've typed it a lot, so I feel like that's more or less the title.
Any other questions or comments before we move to the next speaker? Angelica and Emily, thank you very much. This was very impressive. Thank you for conducting the work and for being such wonderful PIRE fellows. I know that our NSF directors will be very happy to read about your results. So thank you very much.